So Ryan, thanks very much for joining us today for a chat. We've come across each other a fair bit, I suppose, particularly over the last year to 18 months or so during the lockdown through the virtual jam at the Bush stuff, really. I've always liked all of your stuff. But, you've got this amazing band, three-piece band called Kinky Wizzards, right? Now, is it the Kinky Wizzards or Kinky Wizzards? We need to establish that one first.
Right, it's Kinky Wizzards. Facebook won't let me change the name, but everywhere else where we are, it's Kinky Wizzards on our album covers, etc.
Good.
It's also with two Zs as well, because the brothers formed it when they were essentially children, and they had one Z for each brother.
Really?
Yeah. However, the band that had that big Christmas hit, Wizzard, I think they're also called Wizzard with two Zs as well.
Actually, I'm not sure about that. I'd have to check that. I think that I'm maybe not. I think you might be right, but we have to check that. But it's a really cool name, and I guess it comes from the Nick Hornby High Fidelity thing, does it?
You'd probably be better off asking one of the brothers, because they were very much an establishment as a bass and drum duo long before I met them.
Okay.
Again, being brothers and growing up playing, I think Jiff started out on the drums, and then Miff followed suite on clarinet, because they were both playing as part of school orchestras. But then Miff decided he hated blowing into instruments and wanted something a little bit more rock and roll. So he picked up the bass guitar, and they used to jam with their father a lot, who was a guitarist.
Who did the dad play with?
He just played for fun, I think. I know he's been involved with a lot of bands on friendly terms, and he's done some promotion historically. But the boys, just so they could play together, essentially, they started composing bass and drum pieces together. And at the time, they were listening to Rush, which is where we've got a collective love of that band. But they were listening to probably Primus and Red Hot Chili Peppers and bands like that as well. And already they were in their teens. They were trying to figure out what they could do and how they could push themselves just as a duo, which was really exciting.
Yeah. How did you get to know them then?
Right, so I've never told this story before, and it's a lovely story. I used to play five-a-side football in the Spit with some friends, and football is one of these amazing social things for blokes, because you get to meet different people through it, and a lot of my friendships are formed through that. And there was this lovely lad who came in, who was a goalkeeper, and we started talking, and he's an avid record collector, and he said, "Oh, I'm friends with these two brothers who do this crazy jazz, bass and drum stuff, and they're playing in a pub tonight, which is the Three Horseshoes, which is right on the end of it's right at the top of the Power Station Hill, or it used to be. I think it's
I know, yeah.
Flats.
Yeah.
So when that was still a pub, this was 2010.
Yeah.
So I met him there, and I think I was around 17, 18 at the time, and we sat and we just watched Miff and Jiff doing their thing, and my jaw literally dropped, because I'd never seen anything like it, and they were just going hell for leather on their instruments. And if you listen to their first album, Tasting Toadstools, a lot of that album is essentially what they were performing together, and they were thoroughly entertaining for a good hour. But Miff was also wearing R30 t-shirts, and I had grown up with those Rush DVDs as well.
Right.
So, I introduced myself afterwards, and I said, yeah, loved it. That was great. But I'm also a guitarist, and I'm a massive Rush fan. And they were both very, very welcoming, and they had this great friendship circle. But as soon as Miff found out I was a Rush fan, he said, "Oh, let's have you over and jam." So and they only lived down the road. They live on again a house on top of Power Station Hill, and I came over and we started playing together. And I think one of the first things we ever jammed out, which was YYZ, which we still cover to this day. But we're in their mum's house with these triple glazed windows, trying to get away with playing as loudly as possible.
Yeah, with a full drum kit going.
Yeah, exactly. He had the full drum kit set up in his house, which was facing the road. But still, they're so loud, and I think they did annoy their neighbours on definitely more than several occasions.
Yeah, I would have thought so. That pub actually is funny enough. The pub where Brett saw me used to go drinking, Brett from Ether.
Yes,
Drum
yeah.
Depot, yeah,
Hmm.
not far from where he used to live. And you're a Ponty boy then, are you?
You could say that. Yeah, so
Kind of.
I grew up essentially in Aberystwyth,
Yeah.
and then moved to Church Village when I was around 9, 10 years old, and I attended
Okay.
Gwymiskin and then Brinklenog. So yeah, I'm a bather. I suppose more a bather boy.
Yeah, it's just down the road, isn't it? Just down the road. You've posted some amazing things actually of the band, and it's interesting what you said. It's a really good story actually. So it was just literally bass and drums. They'd play just a bass and drum set, yeah, and it was still entertaining for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they were kind of at this age where they were just willing to gig relentlessly as a duet as well. They also had a grunge band, which I was part of briefly,
Mm.
and then they had also been part of a band. Oh, what was their name? Passenger, I think they were called, and they had a record deal. So they were doing a myriad of different things. But any opportunity they had to play as a duet, they just did it purely for fun. And I think Passenger got dropped from their record label. That kind of went apart. Their grunge band, Purple Spiral Project, which was also a covers band, the other members kind of moved on to different things. So they were very much left as a duet. And it was good because they could get themselves into slots. They were more than happy to open up for other acts as well. And it is a spectacle seeing that stuff. And I think that
Yeah.
spectacle element is still something that's very much part of our aesthetic.
I'm
But
trying to imagine it actually. So there's not very many bass and drums kind of acts out there, are there really?
no, not really. And I think, but I think the thing about Miffy as a bass guitarist is he doesn't only think in ways that are quite rhythmical as well. He's trying to be a shredding guitarist on a bass guitar a lot of the
Wow.
time as well.
Okay.
And a lot of his style and his approach to playing is very unconventional, and it's about creating these interesting melodic ideas on the bass. And well, again, probably other influences that he'd be happy for me to tell on his behalf are players like Victor Wooten and Jaco Pastorius, these jazz bass guitarists who are very, very melodic as well. So yeah, it's worth listening to Tasting Toadstools because it shows how far they could take things as a duet.
Is that the last album before you joined and they added the guitar bit?
Yes, it's the first, and they had their previous guitarist Dave feature a little bit on Tasting Toadstools, which was nice. But then I joined full time officially from 2014.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that there's a kind of 4 year gap in between when I met them and when I joined. And there's a bit of a reason for that, because initially they asked me to kind of join their band with their singer full time. And I wasn't prepared to do that because I was wanting to go down a very academic road as a musician. So I said, let's hold off for now because I want to go to Guildford. I want to experience uni life. I want to improve myself as a guitar player as well and learn as much as possible about being the best musician I can be. So I had some time away in Guildford, near London, doing loads of projects, learning loads. And then when I came back in 2014, I felt more than prepared to do an album with them. And that's when we started to getting together really regularly. And eventually that led to Quirky Musings.
I've got to ask, when you were in Guildford, I'm guessing you were a regular at Anderton's, were you?
Oh yes, I lived a couple of doors away,
Yeah.
and as a student, particularly a music student, and as a guitarist, where gear can take over entire pub conversations, yeah, that's financial suicide.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I got a lot of the stuff I use to this day. I mean, this is the thing I kept on justifying it with. I'm making long-term investments.
Yeah. Well done. Well done.
So yeah, I use an amp by a company called Victory. I think I was one of the first people to buy an amp by that company because I walked on into Anderton's as soon as I knew they were there and got one because I love those amps. Got loads of pedals from there as well, but a lot of the stuff I still use to this day. So yeah, it's an amazing music store, probably one of the best in the UK.
So I love the videos. So did you get to meet Danish Pete and all the rest of all the guys? Did you? Is it Danish Pete? Is that his name?
Danish Pete.
The guy does the demo stuff. What's his name? Danish. I think it's Danish Pete, isn't it? Maybe the other guy's Pete, isn't it? What's his name?
Yeah, I'm not really sure they had established their YouTube channel, because I know they started doing like really high profile interviews, but I think that was kind of after I was out the scene at Guildford.
They're like sort of celebrities, like they're online music celebrities these days. Just would love to kind of wander in and they're really there, sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're running a shop as well at the end of the day. But the fact that they've had these high profile guitar players and they're interviewing them regularly shows their stature as a store. I know of Rob Chapman. I think I met him once briefly because Natasha, his wife, I studied with, and she's lovely. So there's I still have quite a few connections in Guildford, and I've kept in touch with some of my tutors there as well.
Stayed in Guildford for a weekend to see a gig actually in the hall there, and I didn't put two and two together. I didn't visit Anderton's. It kills me. I've got to go back again now to go and visit the store. You've mentioned a whole load of influences, and I suppose they're kind of fairly self-explanatory when they hear the stuff that you do. From a listener's perspective, it's very technical. It's melodic. It's very technical. And I suppose, it's in the kind of jazz fusion towards rock kind of territory, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what was really interesting when I joined Kinky Wizzards in 2014, I was really excited about what I could contribute as a guitar player. And I think I had loads of time to kind of really, really, really absorb a lot of my influences as well. Because whilst these guys, which is crazy to think they're just down the road growing up whilst I'm growing up as well. But I was practicing with a friend, and but I was also listening to some serious guitar players. I mean, I started off with Russian Queen as my two main influences, and Alex Lifeson and Brian May I love to this day. But what happens is eventually you're kind of trying to think, what more is out there? And Brian May released these compilation albums, these air guitar compilation albums, which my dad bought me for Christmas once. And through that, I started discovering other bands like, Free and Paul Kossoff.
Oh, nice.
And then Van Halen. But eventually I came across Satriani. And when I heard Surfing with the Alien for the first time, I was like, what is this? This is just ridiculous. And as someone who was being very studious with my instrument, I heard that and thought that's another level. So I went to my guitar teacher in Ponting and I said, can we try that, please? And he was like, crikey, okay.
Nice.
But then, so Satriani I listened to religiously, and then Steve Vai would inevitably come along, and then Eric Johnson, Paul Gilbert, Sean Lane, all the technical virtuoso guitar players.
What about Zappa?
A fair bit of Zappa as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, Fi spent a lot of time with Zappa, and I think Zappa was probably someone who came along much later in my listening life, because when you listen to him initially, it's so out there and it's so hard to digest what he does. And to be honest, Zappa's catalogue is still something I'm absorbing and listening and digesting. I think it takes a lifetime with that stuff. But yeah, there was also the progressive metal acts as well, like Yes, Genesis, Dream Theater, Tool, Porcupine Tree. So I was listening to all of this music that was very expansive, very ambitious, and I've done some of my own kind of progressive rock acts myself. But with Kinky Wizzards, I think there were a couple of initial things that we already wanted to do and kind of draw up in our manifesto. It was to technically push ourselves, that's for sure, but do it in a way that was quite tongue-in-cheek, humorous, quirky, didn't take itself too seriously, because I think a lot of jazz fusion can fall into the trap of being a little bit pompous and superfluous. So we wanted to kind of dress it up in a way that was really, really fun, because that's what we're doing. We're essentially like children in a playhouse when we're playing. We're very much having as much fun as possible.
Towards virtuoso children in the playhouse, I would say.
yeah, perhaps so. But then I think the third thing as well was exploring and negotiating different genres. So seeing how much we can blend rock, jazz, blues, funk, metal, all of these different things together.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, and especially when you're writing instrumental music, I think you got to think in a way, you got to think of ways to make it sound like it has a narrative or sound like it has drama.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How do you do that?
I think it can be a structural thing. It can be a textural thing. It can be sometimes imitative things that you can do with your instruments. And I like to think sometimes that when I'm writing stuff with Miff, it's either like my guitar and his bass guitar are having an argument, or we're trying to work together collectively through something.
Yeah.
This is all very abstract stuff, I suppose, but from our kind of initial jams, a lot of the time then becomes this thrashing out discussion going, right, okay, what makes an A section, or what makes a B section? It's almost like a parallel with composing classical music, because instead of having verses or choruses, you then start having contrasting A, B, C sections.
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, I mean, yes, you could say yes, we're kind of I suppose, towards kind of that kind of territory, really, very complex, and towards operatic almost, really, in some of the stuff that they were doing, beautiful music. The trouble with instrumental and jazz and stuff like this is you can leave the audience behind, and I suppose you can get lost in the technicality of it. How do audiences react to the stuff that you play?
Well, it's been a while. In fact, the first time we played, we managed to play last week because a jam night had opened up, and
Where?
it was in the Vulcan Lounge in Cathays.
Okay. Oh yeah.
And we just showed up and we played 2 songs, and we did capture the attention of our audience, I have to say. I mean, it's very humbling, because again, I think with Jiff, especially as a drummer, me and Miff jokes that it does become all about him, because he has an enormous drum kit, but he can fly around like a circus freak as well. Yeah. But again, people do respond to it really positively, and I think, well, it's been enormously frustrating for everyone, but a lot of that spectacle and that excitement element, we've just not been able to experience because we haven't been able to play live. But I think for a while, at least anyway, even if people are not accustomed with instrumental music at all, there is we put on a show, we have a laugh, we make it really fun, and it can become a thrilling spectacle, I think, for some people who are completely alien to it, because they're just seeing something happening that perhaps they don't see quite as often. I mean, I'm well aware of the fact that what we do is very much for our own interests first and foremost. We're very uncompromising in that, and what we do have, some very, very vocal and very dedicated followers, which is lovely. But I'll say off the bat, this is definitely not for everyone, and that's totally okay. And I'd much prefer having the full integrity of doing something we absolutely love, and people coming along for that ride and loving it.
Yeah.
Than trying to, because I don't think anyone can please everyone these days. There's far too much out there. But at the same time, it's very humbling when we go out and we play shows, especially to unsuspecting audiences. Yes. And they come along for the ride for the brief time we play to them, and take it for what it is.
So, do you play festivals? I imagine you have done.
Yes, we have done historically. I mean, again, the timeline gets a little bit complicated over the last few years. We've done Cambridge Rock quite a few times. We've supported Magenta quite a lot. But in terms of how frequently we've gigged, it hasn't been that much. And a lot of the reason was I took a teaching job in Dubai, which was offered to me, and I couldn't refuse it at the time, because it was a really, really exciting job, and it was an exciting new chapter. But during that time, I worked remotely with the boys throughout, pretty much.
Oh, did you? Okay.
So we released Quirky Musings in 2017. I managed to come back and tour that a little bit. And then from 2018 to 19, I was away in Dubai demoing stuff, sending it to them. They were working on ideas together. And then there was this kind of back and forth process. I'd come home for Christmas, we'd rehearse it. and then we recorded our last album, The Effervescent Travelers, in the summer of 2019.
Yeah. So I mean, I like the titles. I suppose you know that's the thing with instrumentals. You can call them what the hell you like, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think with Effervescent Travelers, there was definitely a little bit more of a context behind that. I mean, given the fact I was away in Dubai, but I was traveling a lot. Um, and I was seeing many different places. And I think it's worth remembering as a musician that you know, when you make your own music and when you're writing, you're very much the product of your experiences as well, and things that are happening around you. And the last album especially, I wanted to make very vibrant, very colourful, and about all of these different places I've seen, from vast metropolis to mountains.
But communicating that through instrumentation.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And there's one great track that I absolutely love playing, called Sur le Durdon. Um, we've got a great story. We initially called it Down the Durdon, and it's basically about the Durdon River in South France. Because the boys have a cottage out there. It's a family place, and we go out there for the summers a lot of the time to be in the middle of nowhere, enjoy wine, do a little bit jamming, and canoe riding, and we very much captured that kind of peaceful, fun feeling of being away there in the summer. And I called it Down the Durdon. Jiff was like, we should call it the French version of that. So he's like, oh, let's Google translate Down the Durdon. And it came up with à la basse de Durdon. And I went, Jiff, I did French GCSE. I'm pretty sure that means at the bottom of the Durdon River.
Yeah.
So we got our friend over in France, Thibaut, to properly translate it. So it's Sur le Durdon, which is at the Durdon. But you know, there are really good examples of that again, where you know we use instrumental music as a means to kind of to put ourselves and then put the listener in a different place.
So let's just talk a little bit about the other guys. So you're obviously Riffy, yeah. So we have Jiffy and Miffy, right?
Yeah.
And I love that. I didn't know that. I love the fact that they're brothers. That's also, I think, probably quite unusual. And you know, tell us a little bit about them, yeah, as musicians and the kind of people, you know.
Well, the first thing I can say about that is I do think there is such a thing as a blood relation that goes on when you see musicians perform together. I think the first example I probably...
Certainly, sorry to interrupt you, just say certainly vocally, bands like the Staves, you know.
Well, that was what I was literally just about to say.
Okay,
When I saw the Staves for the first time on Jules Holland, my jaw dropped. I was like, wow, that is absolutely magical.
They're the same person in different body forms, aren't they?
Yeah.
Vocally.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can argue that, you know, it's that environment of them being in close quarters. And in fact, when I was in Dubai, I taught, you know, two twins out there who had that kind of same thing going. You know, and when you see young people who are brothers and sisters and they're able to, you know, use their musical interests and utilize all the time they have together, magic. So Miff and Jiff certainly have that, because they've just played together since they were children. And there are things they can do which I'm convinced if they weren't brothers they wouldn't be able to do. And that first kind of viral-ish video they released of their bass and drum stuff before I joined them, there are a couple of moments where, you know, I'm thinking you need to be looking at musicians to cue certain things. You know, like Jiffy's looking one way with the floor tom and snare, Miff is looking the other, throws the stick in the air, just goes boom, and they hit it exactly at the same time. And I think that of all the kind of moving around their instruments that they were doing, that part was the most impressive for me, the fact that they could cue each other supposedly out of time without even looking at each other.
Yeah. It's incredible.
So it's great. And in terms of where I fit as a guitar player, I mean, they do call me the professor a little bit, because you're
the academic.
Yeah, I handle music in quite an academic sense, but especially with the last album, you know, I brought a lot of ideas to the table, but I'm well aware that as I write guitar parts, I want to give them full agency with their instruments. And the thing I normally say is I'll throw all of this stuff to them and they'll just chew it up and spit it back at me and go, why, you know, let's do this. Why don't we do this? And a lot of the drum and bass parts they come up with, I never I would never have envisaged when I was writing the guitar parts. And that is a really exciting process, because Jiff especially is always determined to think about ways he can make it a little bit more interesting or add a different angle. And there's this negotiation that happens as a band where we go, maybe you're taking it too far, or maybe you're not pushing it enough. And, again, that beautiful thing about being a trio is you always have a little bit of a 2-to-1 vote. So any time there's a compromise, it's it's a small panel to work through. But
I suppose you one thing you escape from, Ryan, you escape from the which is often the case, the egotistical kind of singer. So you're all bouncing off each other, aren't you?
I mean, there is unfortunately a trend, isn't there? And you have a singer in the mix. I don't know why, but again, if they're that front person, there again more compromise has to come into play. But without that in the equation at all, the three of us, again, the thing that's happening more than anything else in the room, besides us having a laugh and a real giggle at times, is just this fact that we are trying to push each other to the nth degree, and to have that liberty to do that is really positive and really fun. Yeah, I mean, there's some video content out and about with the band, and obviously if you want to share it through the site, that would be great. You're more than welcome to do that. I mean, it's stunning, musically, it's just stunning. I played all my life, but I'm never going to be a virtuoso musician. I'm a singer-songwriter. I play guitars, and that's what I do. So you do things very differently to me, which brings me on a little bit to Kit, because you got a Moog shirt on today, right? Yeah, it's unusual for a guitarist, actually. But what's the idea there? Right. Well, I guess this is more from my work as a soloist as well. Again, whilst Kinky Wizzards is certainly one aspect of who I am and what I do, there are a lot of facets about me as a musician as well. So I'm currently working on a solo album, which I can't really say too much about because I haven't released any music at all. But it's unlike anything I've done previously. It's 6 tracks, and it's got a kind of mixed influence of kind of songwriting that's kind of, I suppose, influenced from that kind of 80s prog era, but also new wave, a little bit of 9 Inch Nails and grunge in there as well. But I love mixing guitars and synths up and creating really dense atmospheric cinematic sounds. So I own a Moog synthesizer, but I also use Arturia plugins. I love Prophets, the S80s, Jupiter synths, and I also use a lot of sample libraries as well. Yeah. But besides that, in the last year, especially when I've just been doing my masters, I've been working on a solo record, but I've also been doing a little bit of writing for different contexts. So I've done a couple of theatre productions. I've done what have I done? I did Disability Sports Wales Award ceremony. I've recently done a nice Edvard where I've composed for harp and viola. So even though guitar is my baby and it's my first instrument, I love sound in general, and I love exploring textures and arranging. And this is where I suppose my composer element comes in.
What's the course what's the MA?
It's in composition.
Right.
So you'll see this last year, I would have been working from everything from notation through to synths, through to even music concrete, where you're making music out of.
I love that stuff.
Materials.
Have you recorded any of that, by the way?
Yes. Yeah.
Do me a favor, Ryan. Could you send me some?
Yeah, I will do. Yeah. I mean, I've kept it pretty quiet for now. I think. Because I think there's been this real intention of me just exploring and just trying to see from a very pure angle what I can do, and I suppose I've been a little bit private about it just because they've been processes of me learning. But the one I submitted one for my portfolio, and it was capturing the woods next to where I live, followed by a construction site, and contrasting those two sounds.
Oh, lovely.
It was. When I was first asked to do it, because I was kind of spurred on by a tutor to do it, I was like, what am I doing? I was just walking around woods with a camcorder, or like a portable. Yeah,
did you see the guy who recorded? Have you seen the one where the guy records music with a tree? Have you seen that one?
Not yet, no.
I'll find the link. I'll send it to you if I find it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been some, I mean, a lot of them are a little bit esoteric and hard to find.
Oh, totally.
They're not all on Spotify, but there's this French composer, Manuel Pellegrini, who did a piece called Icebreaker, which was essentially micro montages from a glass with of gin and tonic with ice.
Wow.
And the sound world she created was phenomenal. So I think I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm going to be a little bit harsh in my criticism here, but I think rock music is struggling at the moment.
Because why?
Well, I would say that's because it's quite a complicated reason, and I'll probably go onto that shortly. But I think one thing I'm kind of doing in response to my boredom of some of the more kind of what you would call conventional music out there. I'm out there challenging myself, trying to listen to as many different things as possible, and also see what's sonically possible from different timbres and instruments as well. Going back to my point about rock, though, I'm going to be very unfiltered here, but I think there's two fundamental problems, and there's one I can associate with progressive rock in particular, which is just an overbearing sense of nostalgia. I think the other issue I suppose I have is just there's been this lack of innovation, and in the last 10 years I really struggled to kind of come up with a decent kind of collection of rock albums that I think have kind of tested the mold a little bit, or tried something that's a little bit different.
You mean new stuff? Yeah,
new stuff. I mean, and a lot of the albums that I do rate from kind of rock or progressive rock or metal acts are kind of from who I'd probably call the veterans, like Clockwork Angels by Rush in 2012, Alice in Chains, Gojira, but that's more metal. And a lot of the music that I've been kind of record releases that I've listened to in the last 10 years have been from completely different genres. So it's funny because even though I'm a guitar player, I'm not listening to guitar music all that much compared to a lot of other stuff. I think women have been incredibly innovative in the last 10 years. I think some of the stuff that female artists have put out is unbelievable. Like Bjork's records are just magical. There's a couple of new artists as well, like Julia Holter, who's done some really, really wonderful adventurous stuff. Caroline Polachek, Regina Spektor, who does a lot of chamber pop stuff. So I guess I've been listening to a lot more music beyond I suppose conventional rock and roll guitar, even though I write that music.
See, I only want to ask you about a couple more things. It's been a great conversation. It's really interesting to talk to you. You really flow music. It's your language. You speak music. But I mean, when I'm listening to new artists, I don't know. Maybe we're on the same page. I don't think we are, but I'm very song orientated, as opposed to technique orientated. So when you're listening to stuff, are you coming at it more from the technical perspective, or is it a marriage of that and the song, if you like?
Oh, I totally understand your sentiment as a singer-songwriter. I think the song is still important. I think I can put this as a triangle. I love this analogy and I use it all the time. There's the knowledge, there's the music theory on one kind of corner. In the other corner is technique. And I think those together have to be in service of the top corner of the triangle, which is the music. And I suppose it then becomes about intent and success of kind of doing that. But there are some amazingly simple things out there that translate as beautiful music. I mean, you need look no further than something like Pink Moon by Nick Drake.
That's my all-time favorite album.
Yeah. So I have a total understanding and appreciation of songwriting in its simplest form, and it's difficult for me to answer that question, I suppose, because again, to everyone and their experience, it will be slightly different. But I try to have as a wide an appreciation as possible, and I won't be fazed by an artist that uses a lot of technique to kind of create something with clear intention. I think problems start to arise for me when people start using music to display technique or to display music theory. And I might be a hypocrite for that because obviously I'm in a band that tries to do things with a lot of technicality, but I suppose I can back myself up a little bit by saying, yeah, even though what we do is technical, and there's a lot going on in there, the ultimate goal is to kind of have a lot of fun with that and create something that has a spectacle. So that's the intent. So it's kind of it's carefully balancing that triangle, and you can have all sorts of different acts and artists and music on each of those spectrums. But I approach all music with as little prejudice as possible, even pop music. And there will be things that I clearly don't like, but at the end of the day, it's my opinion, and that doesn't mean it's an incontrovertible fact. And unfortunately, in the advent of internet, a lot of people do fall into this trap of thinking, I think this way, I think this about music, therefore it's completely right, and no one has a right to have an opinion on this.
Yeah, but the beautiful thing is that everybody has a right to an opinion, and unless if that wasn't the case, life wouldn't really be worth living.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to talk to you a little bit about guitars. I'll ask you a few quick fire questions. How many guitars do you currently own?
A dozen at the moment.
A dozen. Okay.
Yeah.
And is there a guitar that you once had that you no longer have that you really wish you hadn't got rid of?
No.
You kept them all. Kept them all, have you?
I've kept them all. Yeah. I mean,
well done.
I was speaking to my friend who lives up the road who sold his first Ibanez Super Strat because he just grew out of it. I think. Yeah, Ibanez Super Strats are definitely something you grow out of, or maybe not if you're me. But yeah, he regretted selling that. But even though I'm not playing that frequently, partly because it needs a setup, I just can't. I don't have the heart to get rid of it. I did sell one guitar, but it was a PRS Korean model, and I basically upgraded it to an American one when I could afford it. And I had a brilliant student who was really interested in upgrading his guitar, and I said, look, I'm not going to be using this guitar at all, and I'd much prefer to see it used.
Nice.
And so I sold it to.
So you teach guitar as well, yeah?
A little bit, yeah. I'm doing a myriad of different things at the moment. So alongside my masters, I've been doing some paid commission work. I've done a little bit of sound engineering and mixing. I have one-to-one students, but I'm also a supply teacher at the moment, so I've been in primary schools as well.
Oh,
so,
great! That's fantastic.
Try to keep busy. I mean,
yeah.
it's and obviously I do love the classroom. It's really rewarding. But I'm of this kind of firm belief that I'm happy doing anything for music, and so long as I can be mixing up, creating, performing, arranging, teaching, writing, it's all good.
Yeah. Well, it's you've obviously got a great future ahead of you. I would have thought whatever you do, you're going to be successful. Honestly, as far as I can see.
Thank you.
And I'm sure there'll plenty of offers. I was reading this old perennial came up on the internet yesterday. The old perennial of why do you need all those guitars? So why do you need all those guitars, right?
I probably don't. I mean, at the moment, some of those guitars that I did inherit from a step uncle who was again passed away far too soon in his life, and there are some that I do have that I've just incidentally happened upon that I haven't necessarily bought. So I am looking to kind of possibly kind of move them on and make sure that because as guitars, they're tools, they need to be used. But I would say fundamentally I use my Strats loads, I use my PRS, I use my Ibanez, and when I'm producing records as well, one thing I do with Kinky Wizzards, I probably use about 4 or 5 different guitars. And a lot of the time I'm doing double tracking, or there's certain tones or certain specific kind of characteristics I'm looking for that a certain guitar can do better than the other. And I think what's really nice with the Strat and the PRS, for example, which are my 2 main guitars at the moment, is that there's that instant contrast between single coil pickups and humbuckers. That kind of bright sparkiness or that warmth. Or in case of the PRS just screams basically as well. So there is that. But then I own a couple of acoustic guitars, and there are some for utility. Basically, I'm happy to show up in any venue with one particular guitar because it's quite cheap. Whereas, with my Martin guitar, I'm a lot more precious with that. But especially when you're in the studio as well, a lot of guitars and their different qualities as an instrument lend themselves to certain things you're trying to achieve.
Okay, that's a really good answer, and I've got a few. I haven't got as many as you. I've got 6 or something. But it does come up in conversation, particularly with my wife now and again. Why have you got so many guitars?
Well, that's the main conversation it's going to be, isn't it? And again, so long as you've got those multi-stands, or you've got a dedicated corner, you can store them in a way that's quite practical. I am missing.
I don't know if you can see. You can see over here,
there we are. Yeah, got your dedicated space. I'm definitely missing a tele because I love Telecasters.
Yeah, I like teles.
I've used loads for my last couple of solo endeavors, but I've always ended up borrowing them. But the other thing as well, I suppose, and this is really difficult to achieve with a band like Kinky Wizzards, but I'm kind of ping-ponging between the PRS and the Strat. And I'm constantly asking myself this question, saying, there has to be a guitar out there that can do everything I wanted to do for Kinky Wizzards. But
I don't know.
The Ibanez definitely is not that, because I just don't like the cleans on the Ibanez. Charvel is one I'm aware of, but I need to save for a Charvel.
Just to say, a guitarist who I work with has just recently bought himself a Gibson Les Paul Studio, and it's quite cute because it has coil tap option on it, so you can actually go between humbucker and single coil, which is kind of cute.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Guthrie Gavan, who was touring with Stephen Wilson, had a Fender version of that. And if you can find a guitar like that can switch between them without changing the output volume, magic.
Bit of fine tuning. Just to ask you one more thing, because there's loads here, but we've got lots of content. What's the future? It's a double question, right? What's the future for Kinky Wizzards, and what's the future for you?
Right. Okay. With Kinky Wizzards, in terms of the short-term future, the plan very much is to start gigging again. We've been kind of absent on the scene for far too long, longer than intended, because when I moved back from Dubai, a lot of the motivation was, I want to get gigging with the boys again. For obvious reasons, we haven't been able to do that. So that's the short-term future. We are working on a new project that's kind of different, and I'm keeping hush about that for now. Sorry to be a little bit.
2 things you said you're working on, which is top secret. So that's cool.
Just because just because I want it to evolve into something where I'm happy to talk about it. In terms of the next Kinky Wizzard show, this is the first time I'm announcing this, because tickets are going to be coming out any time now. We're playing Club Ivor Bark on the 10th of September, which will be our first official show. But beyond that as well, we'll start putting dates down. For me personally, I'm currently working on this solo album, which I'm going to release more information about probably in autumn time, which has some different musicians on board. I've still got another year of my masters, and beyond that, I honestly don't know yet. But it's there's a couple of guarantees. I think it's going to be musical, and I think I will be trying to dedicate as much of my time as possible to inspiring young people to take music as well, because I'm a passionate believer in that.
Yeah, that's a lovely way to end it, really. Just to tell you, my daughter, she's 18. What day are we on? Monday. She's 18 on Friday, and so when you were talking about working, in kind of infant schools, I suppose, environment, she went to St. Michael's. She won't see this until it goes out. So, but I spent last night putting together all these pictures. Somebody once said to me, when she was born, take loads of pictures. So we took loads of pictures. So I got pictures of her in a little infant school uniform, and then in her, kind of, the secondary stage. And now she's, off to uni in the autumn. And I think it's something, the only time in all of her schooling, and you'll get this, the only time in all of her schooling where I was actually a bit of an emotional wreck was when she left St. Michael's that day. Yeah. It's something about those times, and that pivotal time in a young person's development, and meet someone like you with your love of music, and to get that across, that's gold dust, really.
Yeah, I absolutely. And I I think it's a real shame at the moment that people's experiences of music are so varied at the moment. There are some schools doing honestly amazing, wonderful things that I've seen. But it's very easy sometimes to have a conversation with a kid and said, oh, how much music have you experienced? And they turn around and say not much. And I think there are some brilliant people in the music education world, like Martin Faulty up in Birmingham, who are really pushing for music to be a constant thing within the curriculum, because it can only benefit students. And and unfortunately, with the way education has changed a little bit, we have to fight our corner a little bit for music. And if
definitely,
and it's like with the FE college that down in Nagaro, I was doing some one-to-one there, and the college were paying for that on their behalf. And again, as soon as some of these kids were 16, they were losing full contact with music. It's trying to allow as many opportunities as possible to allow them to engage. And again, even if I can just do a small contribution, I mean, there are people like Stephen Preston, for example, who does wonderful things with audacious, and there's a lot of good stuff out there. And the more we can kind of promote that and encourage kids to take up music, like taking up sports, it's all for the better, I think.
I want to ask you just one thing, because you just triggered this in my mind. Just like a brief response kind of thing, really. But what you said about the challenges that music and the arts in general are facing, and the perception of their value, and that lessening support in lots of different ways from top down. I mean, so if you could give a message to the powers that be, why does music matter?
Oh gosh, right, okay. This is a huge question. There's a poster I saw once in someone's classroom when I was learning to teach, and it basically gave a definition of what music was in its many forms. It's language, it's history, it's science, it's maths, it's a language. It's all of these things intrinsically packaged together. And I'm not expecting everyone to go out there and be a fully fledged musician, but I think everyone should believe they're musical. You have a conversation with loads of adults, and if they don't believe they're musical, it's normally one thing they say as a regret to a musician, that they didn't play an instrument. And I think, well, the one thing I used to say this to my year 9 students, even if they weren't taking GCSE, at the end of every school year, you are musical, you are a musician. And it's about giving them the tools to engage with it, because it improves us in so many ways. It allows us to be better communicators. It allows us to be happier. Singing scientifically makes you happier. It improves our well-being. It improves our fitness. It makes us think more critically. It's just this magical phenomenon, this art form that possesses all of these things that can elevate us and improve us as humans. And I think that's the thing I'd say.
Wow, what a fantastic answer. I'm really glad I asked you that. Ryan, just keep continuing the stuff that you do. Good luck with everything. Like I said earlier, I'm sure you got a great future. And thanks very much for your time, and good luck to you and Kinky Wizzards.
Thank you, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.